Welcome back. This is the second lecture in the series, and today we turn to something darker and more personal. The tragedy of three of the Horus Heresy's Primarchs: Konrad Curze, Angron Perturabo, three sons of the Emperor, broken not only by the wars they fought, but by the very worlds that shaped them. So settle in. This one runs deep. Why these three? Because to my mind, the community has come to hold a not quite just view of them. Many Primarchs could be examined, of course, but these three are the most interesting and the most tragic in a specifically existential sense. Let me begin with a line. Death means nothing next to the vindication of a life. Anyone who knows the world of Warhammer will recognize these words as Curze's. He is the protagonist of the Night Lord's trilogy, a cycle set in the 41st millennium, yet one that tells us a great deal, in close detail, about Curze himself. That single sentence is, I would argue, the leitmotif of the Night Haunter's entire life, and I shall try to prove it. Beyond that trilogy, we come to know Curze through a number of books set in the age of the Great Crusade and the Heresy: Vulcan Lives, The Unremembered Empire, Pharos, and a scattering of short stories. As a lead character, he appears, in truth, only in The Unremembered Empire, where he clashes with the Lion and with Guilliman, and in the shorter tales, in particular, the one in which he is taken captive. Though strictly speaking, I would not put it so bluntly. The Night Haunter arrived precisely where he wished to arrive. So as a protagonist, he surfaces rather rarely. Let us start from the very foundations. The pod-bearing Konrad Curze came down on Nostramo, an unremarkable world in the system and sector of the same name, out in Segmentum Ultima. Nostramo was widely known as a world ruled by its criminals: murderers, rapists, maniacs, psychopaths, whole gangs of degenerates in every shade of moral rot. And yet, if you read attentively across the rest of the Horus Heresy, you come to understand that Nostramo was no aberration, nothing standing outside the norm. It was, in fact, the norm, by the measure of the Imperium. Consider the petitioner's city on Terra, a vast, unplanned megalopolis of slums where the gangs rule, and where the ruling gangs themselves answer to the last surviving Thunder Warrior, a story worth telling in its own right. And this petitioner's city presses right up against the walls of the Imperial Palace, which means that lawlessness plays out, minute by minute, almost at the sacred heart of the Imperium of Man. This is why, in the novel Pharos, recalling his childhood on Nostramo, the characters arrive at a bleak conclusion. Curze was right. The universe is unfeeling, merciless, cruel, and there is no hope. And they conclude, both of them, that Nostramo was in essence a scale model of the Imperium. On that miniature, the Night Haunter demonstrated plainly that only fear and hatred can hold human nature in check. Otherwise, evil, sooner or later, lifts its head. There is no shortage of proof for this. Recall what became of Olympia after Perturabo joined the Great Crusade and left the planet to govern itself. The world he had united sank once more in his absence into feud and political strife. We shall return to that. Perturabo, in fact, walks the very same road as Curze. He, too, passes sentence on his homeworld and punishes it without mercy. The difference is that Curze never clung to his past. Rather, he tore into it with furious wings and fangs, as he says himself more than once in Pharos. The relationship between Sanguinius and Curze deserves separate treatment. One must be clear on this. Every Primarch is a psyker to one degree or another. Even Lim and Russ, traditionally thought to have nothing to do with the warp. The book Leman Russ, The Great Wolf, shows it plainly enough. It is simply that in each of them, the gift surfaces with different intensity, and differently in different circumstances. As exceptions, one might name only Guilliman and the lion, who, so far as I recall, never interacted with the warp at all. In their psychic natures, Curze and Sanguinius are not merely alike, they are all but identical and at the same time diametrically opposed. The identity rests on this: both are prescient psychers. They see the future, literally. The opposition rests not on genetics, but on the conditions of their becoming, on upbringing. Sanguinius, as we know, grew up among wise and kindly people who from the very first, even before his mutation, took him for an angel, quite literally. The Night Haunter on Nostramo never had, and never could have had, allies, still less mentors. He lived among criminals who simply used him, and when he grew strong and grasped how the world was made, he began to use them in turn. Let me offer a metaphor. Standing in a bog, if you put on a snow-white mantle, it will turn almost at once into the very thing that surrounds you. And so Sanguinius could not have grown up on Nostramo. That much is plain. Curze simply had no opportunity to become anything else. But this too is no aberration. Though every Primarch carries genetically determined traits of his own, it was the conditions of the world his pod fell upon that shaped his becoming, most of all, and lawfully so. And here I want to set down my own position, an important one. The conditions in which Curze lived do not excuse his atrocities, but they explain them. He never excused himself either. He proved his rightness by deed and by word. In the matter of the prophetic gift, Curze was plainly more far-seeing than Sanguinius, though unlike the great angel, no one ever taught him to wield the powers of the warp, which is what drove him mad in the end. A gift all but impossible to control. And the judgment that Curze saw further than Sanguinius holds true, because Sanguinius himself did not know for certain what would remain at the breaking point, whereas Curze knew it with absolute precision, that the galaxy would sink into chaos, that brother would fight brother, and that it would all end in unrelieved grimdark. Telling, in this respect, is the clash between Curze and Sanguinius on Macraga, in the Unremembered Empire. In skill, they proved equals, for the simple reason that at every instant each of them foresaw the other's move, and neither could win such a fight in principle. Curze, of course, understood this, and came not to fight, but to tell his brother of his visions. Let me quote the passage where he says, as much directly, "Nothing can survive the warp," said Sanguinius. "Happily, I am not a nothing. I survived, and now I know it all. I know how it ends." A sly look crossed his face. "And I know what Father truly wanted. It makes no difference. The galaxy will burn regardless. What awaits us will make the paltry revolt of Horus look like a game." Sanguinius does not at once grasp what Curze is speaking of. A little later, he does, and here I must give the quotation. Their eyes met, and a flash of understanding passed between the two Primarchs. Curze's anguish and rage poured into Sanguinius with such force that the angel dropped to his knees before the throne. "How could I have known?" he breathed. After this, Curze departs. Later, at the book's close, in conversation with Guilliman, Sanguinius says that something in the Night Haunter's words had caught at him. Guilliman, naturally, from his own vantage, waved it away. The Night Haunter always lies. "Perhaps," answered the angel, "and perhaps not." Which is to say, Sanguinius did in fact glimpse a part of what Curze had wished to pass to him. It was only that the Night Haunter did not know how to do it, and tried as best he could, and in part, it worked. For all that, Konrad Curze, just as he does with himself, in no way excuses his sons and their savagery. He set them on their road, hoping, if anything, that they would perish and the galaxy be rid of some small fragment of evil. He says as much, plainly, in that same episode. But his legion proved as durable and as life-loving as its Primarch, and so it survived. And though life-loving may seem an ill-fitting word for Curze, one need only ask, how deeply must a man love life who remains in this world, despite having come to know its black soul better than any other? So yes, Curze, I would say, most certainly loved life. More than that, all his cruelty was, in the end, bent towards making the world better. He did not think so himself, but the fear by which he held Nostramo in check was meant, quite simply, to end the outrages and return the planet to order. This is why Curze began, from the earliest age, to kill, but he killed only criminals. It is worth remembering, as I noted in the earlier piece on archetypes, that a likely archetype for Curze is Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane, the same unprincipled corsair who in the end took to wandering the world, burning out evil with hot iron. The tragedy of Curze. He is, beyond doubt, a tragic figure. All his life he was alone. No one helped him when he needed it most. For centuries he went mad from a gift he could not control. Time and again, he tried to make his brothers understand what future awaited them, and no one listened, while Dorn went so far as to try to charge him with heresy long before it was fashionable. For this, Curze very nearly killed Dorn, and probably would have, had Fulgrim not intervened. Fulgrim, who, as it happens, had in the early years been a mentor to the Night Haunter, while he was still taking up his legion. The end of Curze's story, like the whole of his life, is tragic to the utmost. As we know from the trilogy, his life was ended by an assassin. Plainly, an opponent a common legionary might have handled, a Primarch would have torn to shreds without a second thought. And from this comes the official version that Curze allowed the assassin to complete the task. Probably because he did not see himself in the world the Imperium was about to become, a world where every bright dream and hope had collapsed for good, where there was, quite literally, only war, only grimdark. Such a world was unbearable to the Night Haunter. And beyond that, by his death, he was in some measure cleansed, for his death was the will of the Emperor. The Emperor himself gave the order to send the assassin to kill him. Curze showed that he was faithful to that will to the very end, even though, at some point, he may not have agreed with it. And like the whole of his life, his sacrifice did not prove meaningless. No one understood the message, though the Emperor probably did. For whatever else one doubts, one does not doubt his foresight. In closing, I shall give a passage from Pharos, where Sanguinius speaks with Curze. "The sins of your sons are the sins of their father," said Sanguinius. "Aptly put, we all embody the sins of our father." I shall say again, none of this excuses Curze, but it explains his deeds superbly. Probably, had he grown up on Baal, as Sanguinius did, had he been taught to use his powers, had he not been made to claw his way through a bog of human baseness and treachery. But history knows no subjunctive mood. Even so, I think it fair to suppose that in another world, Curze too would have been another man, perhaps no less resplendent than the great angel. The next Primarch is Angron. Of him I shall say a little less than of Curze, because we know less of the Horus heresy. Only one novel gives him any real depth, and that is Betrayer. The novella Angron, slave of Nusir Iyu, from the Primarch series I set aside. It reached the shelves only days ago, and I have not yet read it. So it is only in Betrayer that we see Angron reflect, that we see his inner struggle. We know that Angron's pod came down on Nuceria, a world of Segmentum Ultima, as Nostramo was. But Nuceria was a harsh slave-holding world. It was ruled by its nobility, aristocrats drunk on power and sunk in vice, who, by their moral principles, stood no nobler than those who ran Nostramo. What set Nuceria apart at the moment Angron fell upon it was that the ruling caste, the highborn of Dashia, had already crushed every natural rival. They had united the planet, put down every revolt, clapped the dissenting in irons. They ruled cruelly and anything but justly, and for their amusement, they had devised gladiatorial games, staged endlessly in every region of the planet. Angron appeared in this world upon an icy mountain peak, ringed by the corpses of Xenos, Eldar, it is supposed, who had foreseen that the Red Angel would one day become a demon prince of Khorne and had tried to kill him at his most vulnerable. That Angron survived speaks to his exceptional physical gifts, which are hard to dispute. And so his life's road began with a killing forced upon him, which could hardly fail to leave its mark on the personality. A being newly come into the world, transhuman though he was, and already compelled to kill several living creatures, a dozen or so. And yet we do not even know what this Primarch was truly like, because immediately after his capture, they implanted in his brain the so-called butcher's nails. This device is spoken of repeatedly in Betrayer and in many other books. The Emperor himself tried to excise the monstrous rot and did not succeed. The essence of the butcher's nails lies in their effect. They drive the bearer into a state of unbridled fury, in which strength, endurance, and reaction all rise, nearly every physical measure. But the warrior loses all self-command, ceases to tell friend from foe, and can no longer think tactically. Even so, Angron's nails differed from the like implants that most of his gene sons later fitted to themselves. In Betrayer, it is written plainly enough, Angron's nails cause him unbearable pain in every moment he spends out of battle. Knowing this, it is hard not to marvel at his strength and endurance, a Primarch who, for all the savage suffering, could at times converse coherently and was even capable of reflection. And in this lies Angron's tragedy, a Primarch who, quite possibly, never wished to make war at all. From the first moments of his life, he was made to kill, and then his mind and body were maimed. We know that, over his life, Angron tried more than once to raise a rising, and in the end, he succeeded. A revolt against those aristocrats of Dashia. He even dealt them several substantial defeats, but in the end, the gladiators were too few. They fought bipartisan tactics, were finally hemmed in, and made their last stand. The parallel with Spartacus suggests itself, but unlike Spartacus, Angron did not die in that moment. The Emperor's forces made orbit over Nuceria, and the Emperor teleported Angron from the planet up to his own ship, him alone. It is not hard to imagine the Primarch's state, a being upon whom, on top of everything, the butcher's nails were working second by second. He wanted, of course, to return to his own, to die fighting beside them for the freedom and equality of his world. But the Emperor, in essence, did not permit it. Why? That is a subject, perhaps, for another lecture. What matters more is that this decision of the Emperor's left one more indelible brand on Angron's soul, probably shattering for good a psyche already unsteady. We know that, for a long time, he let no one near him, down in the lower decks of the ship, and that only Karn managed to find some common tongue with him. Though before that, Angron tore apart a dozen or so of his own gene sons before he came, more or less, to himself, and was talked into coming out. Angron's legion, the World Eaters, was first called the Warhounds. It is known that the legionaries, of their own accord, began fitting themselves with the butcher's nails in imitation of their Primarch, even against the Emperor's direct prohibition. Word reached him that his warriors were turning into something else, and he forbade it. But on the ban, to put it bluntly, they all spat. Not the only time such a thing happens in the Imperium's history. And here is another tragic note. Angron's sons, knowingly and unknowingly, reach towards their father, striving to imitate him in everything, even in his pain. To feel some union with their father, they were ready to submit themselves to unthinkable suffering and to maim their own minds and bodies, just as had been done to him. Now to the reflection. The most telling moment, the one that does to some degree open Angron to us as a person, is his exchange with Lorgar, with Aurelian in Betrayer, in which Aurelian all but forces the Red Angel to recall the so-called Night of the Wolf. This was when two legions, the World Eaters and the Space Wolves, met in battle, and tellingly, it happened long before. The heresy, which rather calls into question Garviel Loken's reaction to the ascension of Horus, for Loken could not bring himself to pull the trigger with a brother in the Bolter's sights, a brother touched by chaos, though he already understood that this was no longer his brother. Whereas the World Eaters and the Space Wolves, long before, killed one another readily enough, and both legions took grievous losses. As for the Night of the Wolf, I have dealt with it in more detail elsewhere. Russ deliberately lost the duel to Angron in order to show him what his legion had become. When Russ rose again, after seeming to fall, it emerged that the World Eaters had fought each man for himself, while the Space Wolves had fought in formation. They had managed to form, at the heart of the battle, a ring in which Russ and Angron now stood, and the Wolves' bolters were trained on the Red Angel. At Russ's word, in a matter of seconds they would have reduced him to bloody scraps before he could so much as lunge. Knowing that his maimed brother understood only the language of force and fury, Russ took, in my view, the only right decision to show the wrongness of the road his legion was walking. But Angron did not see it, most likely because of those same butcher's nails, which never let him think soundly for long. Even so, this episode shows that Angron is by no means a soulless engine of death, and though it is genuinely hard for him to read a situation, of his own state he has no doubt. Let me quote his answer to Russ. "Death holds no sacred mystery for me, Russ, nor any cause for fear." At this he laughed, against the pain the nails dealt him, laughed so hard the tears stood in his eyes. Perhaps I would even be glad of it, which is to say, perhaps he truly would have welcomed death in those brief moments of relative clarity when he grasped what Nuceria and the nails had made of him. There, in the same episode, on the Night of the Wolf, a few paragraphs on, Angron carries the thought further. "Your men are losing. Do you know why? Because yours have something to live for. And I do not care. My heart beats for pleasure, knowing that life is closed to them." Angron here does not excuse his manner of waging war, but he explains it well enough. It makes no difference to him how skillfully his warriors fight, or how well the wolves do. He understands that his legion is maimed as he is, and he accepts it, perhaps seeing in his sons a reflection of his fallen brothers of Nuceria. If on Nuceria Angron fought for freedom and for a better world, then later, broken by the Emperor's act, by that same teleportation, he could no longer and perhaps no longer wish to hold back the fury of the nails and cease striving for anything better. Angron's tragedy is close to Curze's. The Red Angel, though no psyker like the Night Haunter, nonetheless understood perfectly how the world was made and what the galaxy would sooner or later become. And tellingly, he too, like Curze, did not see himself in the new world. The proof is the episode on Armatura, the World Eater's training world, where Angron all but gave up, lying pinned beneath a heap of stone. Lorgar dragged him out and saved him, but Angron was dying there, less from want of air than because he had simply ceased trying to free himself. And the few librarians of his legion who remained with him saw it clearly enough. By all appearances, by the time of the heresy, Angron was, at the least, ready to die, and at the most, wished to die, worn out by the butcher's nails and by the cruelty of the world. For him, and for the legion of the World Eaters, death would have been a deliverance, and in some sense, even an atonement. This is precisely what, in that moment of vivid reflection, on the night of the wolf, he had wished to tell Russ, and Russ, of course, did not understand him. Just as no one could understand Curze. Curze went mad from his gift, his curse. Angron from the butcher's nails, and for people of sound mind, it would have been hard to understand them. And so the two of them were left alone. A few more words on the butcher's nails. I mentioned that none of the Primarchs, save, by my recollection, Guilliman and the Lion, is bound to the warp. Angron is bound to it through the butcher's nails. It is generally held that Angron possesses not even the rudiments of psyker ability. But first, that is unlikely. Betrayer mentions that his legion held many psykers. And, as we know, the most psykers of all were in the Legion of the Thousand Sons, because they had the mightiest of psyker fathers, Magnus, and that gift, wreathing Magnus himself, passed down to the Thousand Sons. It is clear that if a legion holds many psykers, its Primarch cannot himself be devoid of the gift as their binding point to the warp. There is a curious line in Betrayer. I already answered you. Lorgar parried, watching all the while, as his brother's rage guttered out once the ship left the warp. This small remark, which almost everyone missed, tells us that the butcher's nails are no ordinary implant. It seems they are bound, somehow, to the warp. The warp's energy either heightens their effect or creates it outright. In practical terms, this gives us nothing, but once again it points to how monstrous the nails were, and by what miracle Angron kept the power of speech at all in such a state. Small wonder that after nearly 2 centuries of unendurable pain, Angron truly did grow weary of a world that had made him a monster, without granting him the chance to become anything else. The third part. Perturabo is, to my mind, the most underrated of the Primarchs, and underrated not only within the setting, by the Emperor and by Fulgrim, but by the readers too. Yet the only one whose underrating shaped, in any conceptual way, the making and unmaking of Perturabo's personality, was, of course, his adoptive father. We come to know Perturabo through several books. Perturabo, the Hammer of Olympia, from the Primarch series, describes the Primarchs becoming on his native Olympia. Magnus the Red, Master of Prospero, from the same series, shows Perturabo during the Great Crusade. Angel Exterminatus gives us Perturabo in the early years, after the heresy, right after it. And, finally, in Slaves to Darkness he is shown as he had become by the close of the heresy, after Beta Garmin. Effectively, what do we know of his becoming? Perturabo's homeworld? Olympia. Likewise lies in Segmentum Ultima, which perhaps hints at some kinship. Curze, Angron, and Perturabo were all One might say born of segmentum ultima. Olympia was marked by a heavily broken terrain, a multitude of mountain chains, ridges, and rocky formations. The planet's city-states warred endlessly with one another for resources, and precisely because of that terrain, reduced their war to a positional standoff, raising on nearly every mountain an impregnable fortress. It cannot be said that Olympia's mores were the same as Nostrasmo's or Nucerieu's. Even so, here too, there flourished a totalitarian, militarized regime of the highest degree, under that same aristocracy, which saw only one end, the preservation of its own power, while the needs of the people stood far from the top of the agenda. On Olympia, it was not enough to seize resources. One had to hold them too. And so its civilization, quite naturally, reached exceptional heights in the art of fortification and of military engineering in particular. All this Perturabo absorbed while he was raised by Damokos, the tyrant, as Olympia named the rulers of its city-states, of the city-state of Logos. Damokos was, perhaps, far from the cruelest tyrant on Olympia, yet he used Perturabo only to widen his own power, and the Primarch understood this even as a child. Even so, Perturabo loved engineering. He loved the work he did with his mathematical cast of mind, which married perfectly to the colossal analytical powers of a superhuman brain. On Olympia, Perturabo made a great many advanced discoveries. As I said in the earlier piece, the obvious archetype for Perturabo is Archimedes. But unlike Archimedes, Perturabo had no chance to put his knowledge and talent to use in peaceful life, because Damokos, from childhood, tuned his son to the rails of a purely military way of thinking along a single track. And at that, in the end, he succeeded superbly. And this perhaps is the first tragedy of Perturabo's life. A being who was, in essence, a maker, a great architect and engineer, potentially able to create works to stagger the imagination, such as the amphitheater he raised at Fulgrim's direction in Angel Exterminatus, was compelled to turn his talent to a narrow field, to destruction, because he simply knew no alternative. On Olympia, everything breathed war. Everything was bent to war. Tellingly, Perturabo never tried to overthrow Damokos, though Damokos's lust for power, his cruelty, and his manner of waging war held no appeal for the Primarch whatsoever. Why, then, did he not take power into his own hands? Very likely because he had simply grown used to being an instrument, raised as he was in such a setting. And yet it was he who united the planet. Or rather, united he did, but peace he did not bring to it, because there was no peace in the hearts of the people themselves, as on Nostramo and Nostramo. This naturally could not fail to eat at Perturabo's personality, a personality that was, in fact, keen and understood everything perfectly well. And second, he, like Fulgrim, always strove for perfection. But perfection for him was embodied in mathematical precision. What did Perturabo do during the Great Crusade? Leaving Olympia, he swears his oath of loyalty to his father the Emperor, and the Legion of the Iron Warriors goes on to subdue a countless multitude of worlds. But the chief landmark of his campaign is the confrontation with the Hrud. Few know of it, though it is set down in some detail in the Hammer of Olympia, and is a key plot element. The Emperor sends Perturabo to the very edge of the galaxy with the words, "Only you can do this." The Hrud differed conceptually from the galaxy's other races. They moved not through space, but through time, and the chief effect of their presence is a so-called entropic field. It extends a few meters around the Hrud, depending on its strength, and every object, the living and the lifeless alike, that falls within this field begins to age and decay thousands of times faster. In just a few years of waging that war, all Perturabo's legionaries, and he himself, aged by literal centuries, by some 200 years, that is, biologically. It was a genuinely heavy war, grueling even physically, and, given Perturabo's natural endurance, scarcely anyone else could have stood against the Hrud. He grasped this himself, of course, late, only towards the campaign's close, but he grasped why his father had truly sent him there, to sever the migration of the Hrud, which was bound for Segmentum Solar. It is quite likely that key worlds, including the throne world, would have been destroyed by the Hrud outright, had Perturabo not managed to inflict on them a string of defeats. Though, when I say defeat, one must understand that in such a war, the very notions of victory and defeat work rather differently. In the end, worn out and broken by the war with the Hrud, at the very border of charted and uncharted space, Perturabo loses, at some point, his mental balance when he learns that his native Olympia has sunk once more into the depths of discord. Departing with the Emperor, he had left the planet in relative calm, charging its people never to return to their past. The planet had been united under Damocos's ruling hand, and Perturabo hoped that this was enough. But Damocos dies, and the ancient houses of Olympia raise a revolt against the order Perturabo had set. And hearing that he alone among his brothers had failed to hold even his own homeworld under control, when even Angron, in his own way, had united his, Perturabo was broken for good. And then, for the first and last time, he gave vent to his fury, or rather, if not fury, then to disappointment, letting his sons deliver Olympia to the cleansing fire of war. At the storming of Lacos, Perturabo meets an aged Caliphone, his adoptive sister Damocos's daughter. She weeps over her father's grave and accuses the Primarch of having, in effect, worked a genocide upon his homeworld. In that moment, not answering for his own actions, Perturabo simply strangled his sister. And when the bloody veil lifted from his eyes, he looked upon the work of his hands, and himself began to weep over her body. In that moment, he understands perfectly what he has wrought, that it is a genocide, and that the Emperor, as he reckoned, would never forgive him for it. And given that the war with the Hrud had hollowed him out, the motives of his acts are not hard to understand. Whether they can be forgiven is another question. The second great tragedy of Perturabo's life lies to my mind in this, that he was truly broken by circumstances that would break anyone, but anyone else far sooner. He did not fall into hedonism and vice as Fulgrim did. He did not resolve to sacrifice himself as Curze did. Instead, he swore the third oath of loyalty of his life, now to Horus. And yet in Slaves to Darkness, it is plain to see that Perturabo believes neither in chaos nor in Horus. He simply sees no other way out. Having burned Olympia to ash, he feared to stand before his father, and so joined the revolt of Horus, simply because he had grown used to obeying orders blindly. First, he carried out the order of Damocos, then of the Emperor, and now of Horus. And it is precisely this underrating, his own underrating of himself among it, that shaped his becoming most of all. Even so, Perturabo's foresight shows here too. In that same Slaves to Darkness, he understands perfectly that Lupercal is no longer fighting for some higher idea, as at the outset that this is now merely revolt for revolt's sake. When Lorgar comes to the dying Horus, Horus does not wish to return, and Lorgar must give his own life to bring the Primarch back to the battle he no longer wanted. Perturabo, loyal to the very marrow, saw Horus as nothing but a new emperor. He understood all of this perfectly, but did not know how to change it, and probably did not even wonder whether it ought to be changed. Because like Curze and Angron, he had fathomed the essence of the galaxy, and that essence had come to sicken him utterly. Onward, he moved on sheer autopilot, on inertia, a closing word on Perturabo, on his tragedy, and on the qualities that formed him. The first is obvious. For all that he is a broken, hollowed-out Primarch, he remains, all the same, the very standard of endurance. Despite every adversity, the war with the Horide, the error on Olympia, he goes on fighting in any situation. It is for this reason, in part, that in Angel Exterminatus, Fulgrim chose Perturabo, of all of them, for his transfiguration. Only Perturabo had the strength to help Fulgrim become a demon prince and yet remain alive. And Fulgrim says as much, plainly. It could only have been you, Perturabo, perhaps the strongest of us all. Here one should recall, too, from Slaves to Darkness, the duel of Perturabo and Angron, when the Lord of Iron bested the Red Angel, first kindling his fury, then standing firm against its onslaught, and Angron, in the end, came to himself for a short while and could be reasoned with. And here, crucially, many missed this. Perturabo fought Angron without the Iron Circle, without his battle automata, designed by his own hand. It was a deliberate choice. He had no aim to kill Angron, or to do him grave harm. He wished only to kindle that old fury, so that Angron's mind might clear for a few brief moments as it subsided, and only his own endurance let him bear the onslaught of the Red Angel's rage. It works out that the Lord of Iron succeeded where Russ had failed. For all his wisdom, Russ could not reach Angron, whereas Perturabo, when he set his will to it, did. Beyond endurance, Perturabo's second singular trait, underrated by the other Primarchs and by readers alike, is that same foresight I have mentioned. One example I have already given. Here is a second, a vivid one, from the novella, Magnus the Red, Master of Prospero, in the Primarch series, which describes a joint campaign of the Iron Warriors and the Thousand Sons. There is an episode in which Perturabo, before the eyes of the Crimson King, destroys an ancient and dreadfully important artifact, and all but reprimands Magnus, saying that his researches had long since passed beyond the bounds where reason governs them, rather than a blind hunger for knowledge, and a hunger for power through knowledge. Of course, for knowledge is power, which is to say, already then, decades before the Horus Heresy, Perturabo saw plainly this flaw in Magnus, the Crimson King, and tried to make him see it, in vain. Just as Curze, in his time, tried to explain something to Dorn and got nowhere. And so the existential tragedy of the Primarchs is built, in fact, upon the inability, and more often, the unwillingness of one man to understand another, or even so much as to hear him. Transhuman though he may be, one who ought in theory to be perfect, yet they took on all the negative traits of ordinary mortals. Like Angron, Perturabo lives through the heresy, still fighting the Imperium. And importantly, he is the only one who, having also become a demon prince, took no part in the war of the gods for supremacy. He did not fight, did nothing. He concentrated solely on the destruction of the Imperium of man. And where with Angron it was mere blind fury, with Perturabo, the aim, by all appearances, was clearer. The outright destruction of the world of men, depraved, avaricious, brimming with malice and unbearable cruelty. And so it emerges that the tragedy of Perturabo is the tragedy of the whole world of Warhammer, an endless war with no hope of victory. Thank you for staying with us to the end. If Curze, Angron, and Perturabo left you with something to turn over in your mind, then this lecture did its work. There is far more waiting in the long night of the heresy. So until the next one, hold the line. Transmission ends. The Emperor protects. Until next time.